Okay. Good evening and welcome to the City Council Specials meeting for July 5th. 2 minutes. Oh, I thought we were 1 minute. I heard that.
I was with you, Nancy.
So we must,
We're half-
okay, so like, we have a
halfway through
minute
the
and a
agenda.
half for somebody to like come forward with who messed with my chair. Thank you. That's good. Now we have a mystery.
No, it's the ghost of council members past, I think. I just didn't want to be disappointed with not seeing this chair before a meeting. Tradition since I've been on council.
That one was like the pitching forward, like I'm going like, I know, I've seen the drawings.
That's the ejection chair.
Well, it's on so many levels. Hey, how the heck are you? How did the last thing go?
Wow. I don't know what happens now. Okay, now I can start. Okay.
Well, I think Kelly's thing was good.
Good evening again. It is July 5th, and we have a special joint study session this evening with our boards and commissions and others who might want to attend. And I will let our city manager introduce our guest speaker.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone. I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Anne McFarland. And a little bit about Anne. Anne majored in Russian and Ancient Greek at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She received a Marshall Scholarship awarded by the British government and earned a second degree at Cambridge University in England. She then joined the U.S. Foreign Service, serving as a diplomat in Pakistan and on the Soviet desk of the U.S. State Department. After marrying fellow Foreign Service officer Lou McFarland, Anne became a stay-at-home mom in the Congo, Tanzania, and Nepal. On returning to Seattle, Anne became a Russian translator and was elected president of the American Translators Association. Since developing Jurassic Parliament in 2000, she trains elected officials, staff, and nonprofit board members across the nation. Anne is a professional registered parliamentarian with Andrew Estep. She is the author of Mastering Council Meetings. So we welcome Anne McFarland.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor and Heidi. I'm thrilled to be here. Jurassic Parliament and Robert's Rules of Order is one of my favorite topics in the entire universe. But if you say to most people, oh, let's spend a quiet summer evening with Robert's Rules, you'll really enjoy it. It's kind of like saying you're going to enjoy your root canal procedure. So thank you for being brave enough to show up on the day after the holiday. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And our presentation today is called Great Local Government Meetings to take into account both city councils of elected officials and citizen guidelines and commissions. So I'm just going to adjust the screen a little bit here. Here we go. And you have these slides as a PDF if you like to take notes, but you don't have to have it. So these are the topics we're going to cover tonight. Meeting discussion, point of order and appeal, the authority and role of the chair, the members and the staff, how to do this, motions and amendments, advisory committee pitfalls, and then we'll have a brief conclusion. I'm going to ask you if you would be so kind to hold your questions. You can make a little note of them. I'll be glad to take them at the end, and I'm certainly glad to stay on if it's feasible to answer any that didn't get addressed. But since we have a lot to cover in our 75 minutes, I want to just gallop on ahead. So why are we here? What's the point? My goal tonight is to invigorate you to participate in effective local government meetings. I use the word invigorate because many times, as far as meetings go, we kind of tend to go along in the same old groove, and we get in patterns that may or may not be very effective. So I'm hoping that you'll feel at the end of this time that you've gotten some new tools and inspiration for more effective meetings. After taking this training, you'll be able to apply the principle that group authority is more significant than any one individual, even the chair, to use 4 fundamental guidelines for powerful discussion, to respond to disorder or difficult members, to make motions and amendments, and to list 9 different pitfalls for planning commissions and citizen advisory committees. Now, I quickly want to say that I'm not an attorney. This is strictly based on the principles and practices of parliamentary procedure. Nothing constitutes legal advice. If your attorney tells you something different, listen to your attorney. So we're going to be in the League of Northwest Dino Cities. My late husband and I had a lot of fun creating the 70 cities of this league. We'll be in Dinopolis down here, the capital and the port city. Each one of these cities has its own project. And we're going to be at the meeting of the Dinopolis City Council. It's a regular council meeting. The motto of the city of Dinopolis is, "We do our best for all our residents, whether we like them or not." And so obviously the first thing at a beginning of a meeting is to call the meeting to order. You sit in the chair that's reserved for the person running the meeting. Now notice that chair has 2 meanings. One is the physical station in which you sit, and that derives from the time when only the king or the bishop had a chair. Everybody else either stood or sat on benches. And chair refers to you as the person running the meeting, the mayor, the deputy mayor, the president, the chair, whatever. So you take your gavel, if you have one, you rap it lightly 1 time, and you announce this meeting of the Dinopolis City Council is called to order. You ask the clerk to take the roll, and you announce that a quorum is present or not. Now, a quorum is the minimum number of voting members who must be present for business to be done. And usually it's a majority, more than half, of the members in office, the members who are actually serving on the council. Now, quorum is different from votes cast. Quorum is what, as a passive condition, that allows you to take action, and then the votes cast are the action that you take. If you lose your quorum, you can't do business. And of course, for a city council, business includes discussion and hearing and listening. Also, of course, people on public bodies have to be careful to avoid a walking quorum or a serial meeting where members of the body sufficient to equal a quorum are exchanging communication with each other outside meetings. If you want to talk to 1 person, that's fine, or 2 people. But if you're on a 7-person council and you talk to 3 other people, you've created a walking quorum, and that's against the Open Meetings Act. Your draft agenda is prepared by the leadership, but it's within the control of the body itself, subject to notice requirements, of course. And Robert's rule says that if you follow the standard order of business, you don't need to vote to adopt an agenda. But many bodies do vote. It takes a majority vote to adopt an agenda and a 2/3 vote to change it later in the meeting. So we suggest that you prepare an agenda, that you add suggested times for each item, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20, and that you stick to your agenda. Don't allow discussion to slide off into side topics not immediately relevant to the discussion. And we think it's a good idea to add all times approximate or all times estimated to keep flexibility. You don't want to get in a situation where you have to vote to add 5 more minutes to discussion on an agenda item. We suggest identifying items as being either information, discussion, or decision. And it's not a good idea to use action, since action, as I mentioned, can include discussion in local government bodies. You want to watch the time. The chair's role is critical in keeping everything moving. It's not easy to do this, but you have to. You can use an agenda stand with the agenda on a little clipboard. You young people probably all have a second monitor, or you can ask someone else to keep time. But monitoring the time is very important. And this is a paper that I'll send you after our session. Time limits create productive meetings, and it goes into a lot more detail about using time limits at your meetings. So now let's look at meeting discussion, point of order, and appeal. So there is a principle in Robert's rules, very easy to say. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. However, not so easy to carry out in practice. And what it means is that discussion in council and commission meetings is not a conversation. It's not a conversation, it's a debate, and it has its own rules. And this is the first of our 4 fundamental guidelines. No one may speak a second time until everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. That is so important, I'm going to give it to you in red. No one may speak a second time until everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. This is critical and this is transformative. And yet, for some reason, we don't do it. Councils and committees tend to discuss their affairs in conversational mode. In conversations, dominant people tend to dominate and agreeable people tend to let them. So you must have a structure to make sure that everyone has an equal chance to speak. And this is both fair and efficient. It also is the best way to ensure that each person has an equal voice. Robert's Rules gets a bad rap sometimes as being patriarchal and out of date. But in fact, this rule makes things fair. It's a real paradox. The system is formal, but it's inclusive, and it will make for robust discussion and advance your equity goals. Now, if that doesn't happen and things deteriorate into a hockey match, the chair should step in. But if the chair fails to do so, a member can make a point of order. So we represent point of order in our system by a flying dinosaur. So the motion is, the main motion is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. We're discussing something, and then a member makes a point of order. It flies over the heads of the T-Rex, and the chair bats it out of the sky. So when another member breaks one of the rules, a member may make a point of order, and the chair rules on the point. I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to play it twice. Let me just make sure I have my audio settings correct. I do. Okay. Oops, wait a minute. Back to this one. Okay. So I'm going to play this twice.
Point of order.
State your point.
That comment breaks our rules of decorum.
The point is well taken. Members may not use this term.
Point of order.
State your point.
That comment breaks our rules of decorum.
The point is well taken. Members may not use this term.
Now, a point of order is often not very familiar with people. People are not very familiar with it, but it's really important. And you can make this at any time except during voting, and you don't have to be recognized. You actually may interrupt a speaker if necessary, but it must be timely. You have to make it at the time of the offense. You can't come back later and bring it up then. So let's look at how you process it. The member says point of order. The chair says state your point. The member explains, and then the chair issues a ruling. The point is well taken, or the point is not well taken. Now, the chair has to do this. I was at one meeting where somebody said point of order, and the chair said, I agree. That's not a ruling. That's not a ruling. So the mayor or the chair has to say explicitly, the point is well taken, or the point is not well taken. Now you notice that in the suggested language, we're using the third person to keep things neutral and lessen conflict. Don't say you're out of order or you made a mistake. That just immediately personalizes things and sets up an emotional conflict. You're speaking as chair on behalf of the rules of procedure. It's like you're the voice of Robert. You just say what it is that applies. Now, if someone is confused, if a council member has trouble explaining what the point of order is about, you can ask, what rule has been broken? What rule has been broken? You don't get to make a point of order because you disagree with what somebody said. It's about breaking the rules, and this can sometimes help people clarify. And the audience doesn't get to make points of order. If you've got somebody in your public standing up and shouting, point of order, they are out of order. Now, very important, when in doubt, ask the group. The chair can always ask the group to decide if a point of order is correct, if it's well taken, that's the jargon, or not. And the chair doesn't have to say point of order. The chair already has the duty of maintaining order and decorum. So the chair just needs to take appropriate action. Also, the chair is subject to the same rules. If the chair breaks one of the rules, a member may raise a point of order, and the chair rules on their own behavior, which seems odd, but it's the way the system works. Now, once the chair has ruled on a point of order, the only allowable form of discussion is to appeal the ruling. Appeal, in our view, is the most important motion in all of Robert's rules and the least known. The least known. I'm going to give you an example.
The port was a cesspool of corruption.
Point of order.
State your point.
That comment breaks our rules of decorum.
The point is well taken. Members may not use this term.
Appeal.
Second.
Very well, the ruling of the chair has been appealed and seconded. The members will decide the matter. The question is whether the chair's ruling that the words cesspool of corruption break our rules of decorum should be sustained. All those who believe it should be sustained, please say aye. All those who believe it should not be sustained, please say no. In this instance, the members voted no, so the ruling of the chair was not sustained. I've put this unhappy figure in just for fun, but in fact, if you lose an appeal, it's better to maintain a neutral face. Try to give the impression that you don't care.
Or at least that you're not taking it personally.
The port was a...
Now, your rules state that the presiding officer shall state every question coming before the council, announce the decision of the council on all subjects, and decide all questions of order, subject to, however, an appeal to the council, in which event a majority vote of the council shall govern and conclusively determine such question of order. So if you think the chair got it wrong, or if you think that cesspool of corruption is not out of order, out of line, you can appeal, and then it will be the whole council that will decide. So we believe that these two motions, point of order and appeal, are the heart of democracy. They are the way that the body itself, the council, the commission, the committee, is the final authority, not the chair. So it's a startling thing for some people, and we'll talk about it more a little bit in our next section, which is the authority and the role of the chair, the members, and the staff. So I just want to mention that Robert has different rules for small boards, up to about 12 people. So in your council or commission, which are small boards, the chair may make motions, discuss, and vote unless the law, the regulations, or the bylaws say otherwise. And of course, the RCW specifically says that the mayor in a council manager city may take full part in discussion and so on. However, we recommend that the chair exercise restraint by speaking and voting last and by refraining from making motions. This is a Jurassic Parliament suggestion. It's not in Robert's rules, but we think that it makes for better meetings because of the natural tendency to defer to the chair. Now, in all of this, I'm referring to Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 12th edition. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually seen this book, but maybe you will agree with me, even just by looking at it on my screen, that in some respects, it's a terrible book. Robert originally was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In fact, one of his first assignments was on San Juan Island when he built the barrier that was going to protect us from the British in 1859 in case of a war over a pig. And when he published his first book in 1876, it was a pocket manual. It was a nice little thing that would fit in your pocket. And somehow it took off all across the nation. People were thrilled to have a common understanding of how to run meetings. But I believe that his heirs, who still own the franchise, have kept on improving this book until they've wrecked it, which is a very common phenomenon. Anybody who's tried to buy a plain cup of coffee in Starbucks knows what I'm talking about here. And when I was first involved with all of this, as president of the American Translators Association, I just felt like giving up. But I found eventually that there's a core to Robert's Rules that we really need. There's a core that's essential for good and fair meetings. And that's what I aim to share with you in Jurassic Parliament. So if you want to get a Robert's Rules, I strongly recommend the spiral bound edition, which is only available from the National Association of Parliamentarians. And they have also published an In Brief, which is a good little book. You can read this book in a weekend. Nobody wants to, but you can. And again, the spiral bound is very, very helpful. So this is the website for the National Association of Parliamentarians. So just to remind that this is the hierarchy of authority. The US Constitution comes first, then federal law, then state law, then your charter, articles of incorporation, or code, whatever it is that allows you to exist, then your bylaws or council rules, then any special rules of order, and then at the bottom, Robert's Rules of Order. People are sometimes surprised to find that your rules have more authority than Robert's Rules, but that is the case. So I'm going to distinguish here between two different types of organizations. One is shaped like a triangle or a pyramid, and at the top, you've got the boss. The boss hires people to do the work of the organization, tells them how to do it, and if they do it badly, fires them. One feature of this kind of structure is that it has status or rank, and people who are near the top are higher in status than people who are down below. I myself think that's okay, because I think you need the hierarchy, the status ranking, in order to get the accountability. If all of us who were on this call had the job of building an addition to the Ellensburg City Hall, and we all had the same status, we would never achieve it. Now, you do hope that people of higher status will listen to the people down below, which they have a tendency not to do, research has shown. But in itself, to me, this authority, this accountability hierarchy is necessary. Now, this kind of structure is very widespread. Every corporation has a CEO, every school has a principal, every army has a general. It's so widespread that we tend to think of it as the ordinary or default type of organization. But in fact, there's a whole other kind. There's a whole other kind that's called a voluntary association. In a voluntary association, a group of people come together to achieve a common purpose. They set up some guidelines for themselves and they select a leader. But the leader is a peer. The leader is an equal with the same status as everybody else and some special responsibilities during the meeting. So your council, your commissions, your committees, all of those, your nonprofit boards, those are all voluntary associations where the role of the leader is quite different. So these things follow from it. Each member has an equal right to speak and to try to persuade others to accept their view. During meetings, the chair is the servant of the group and the group is the final authority. So I'm going to again give you that in red. During meetings, the chair is the servant of the group and the group is the final authority. That's the most important thing I'm going to say today. Now you have both types of structure. The council, the planning commission, the other commissions and committees, they each form a voluntary association. The city manager and the staff form an accountability hierarchy. So they're linked but different. Now, what is each person's individual authority? When you leave your meeting and you walk out on the street, how much power do you as an individual have? I'm sure you know the answer. Zip, nothing, nada, nothing at all. And this, I think, is an excellent formula about it. All members of a governing board share in a joint and collective authority, which exists and can be exercised only when the group is in session. This is from a different authority, the Standard Code. So I just love that phrase, joint and collective. That's what your authority is. It's joint and collective. Now, what's your individual power? When people get elected to a city council or appointed to a planning commission, often they're surprised at how little power they have. An individual member may not have a staff member fired, direct staff, oversee employee work product, or interfere in administration. I know you all know this, but I just have to mention it. You have to know the limits of your role. You're a policymaker, not a mover and a shaker. Now, the staff are advisors to the body, not members. The body may invite them to speak at its own discretion and should. The staff should be empowered to make points of order and to speak up on their own initiative on occasion. But staff and members should not enter into conversations that hijack the meeting. You know, if you get two people going back and forth for 15 minutes, that's not a good thing. That should be changed. The body, the commission or the committee or the council, must give clarity to the staff. If an individual council member or commissioner wants the staff to do something, the presider of the meeting must make sure that the body agrees by taking a vote. The body as a whole has the responsibility of giving clarity to the staff. Sometimes people say, oh, well, the staff can look into that. Don't do that. Don't float an idea and expect the staff to make it concrete. So here's another paper for you, Successful Staff Interaction in Local Government Meetings. That's my hometown of Shoreline there. And should you have any suggestions or advice on this, please do be in touch with us, because we believe that staff and interaction with its committees and boards and council is very important, and there's not a lot of research on it. Now, I want to mention that it's okay to disagree. The fact that people have different opinions is a strength. It's a good thing, but we tend to identify with our own position. And when we're defeated, we sometimes take it personally. And that's a mistake, because at the end of the day, the body must unite behind its decision. At the end of the day, the body must unite behind its decision. It's a basic democratic principle that the decision of the majority voting at a properly called meeting is the decision of the body as a whole, and the minority must make it their decision as well. Now, this is a terrible system, but I hold with Winston Churchill, who famously said, democracy is the worst system of government in all the world, with the exception of those others that have been tried from time to time. So when serving on a public body, members have a duty to uphold the decision of that body, even if they disagree with it. And so here's another paper for you, Lost the Vote, Don't Sabotage the Council's Action. And it gives examples of what, in our view, would constitute sabotage. All right, so before we go on to our next item, I'd like to spend a few minutes and just ask the council members, what you think about these principles. Do you find that some of them could be useful to you in your meetings? Are you doing them all already? Do you think that some of them are off the wall? I'd love to hear from you.
Council, any thoughts? So I have a question for you then.
Great.
Should not, well, for,
This is time for questions. Absolutely.
do you want to start adding time limits to our agenda items? Or time estimates? That's something you find useful.
I think it would be a useful guide as an approximation, as it was suggested. I think it would help organize the discussion.
I guess I would say I'm not clear how that works. If we're, per the RCW, we're now articulating public comment. We have not been in a position where we can anticipate public comment typically.
Right.
So I don't know necessarily what the time, I mean, yeah, we could do consent 1 minute, you know. But I think generally when we're in the meat of the agenda, there are items where it's, something comes up, something comes forward.
I'd love an estimate on the end.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
That's the point of putting the,
So I was, the other point I was going to make is, and I think to Bruce's comment is and I'm breaking the rule by interrupting before anyone's spoken, but I think one of the potential, and I'm sure Ms. McFarland has feedback on this, but if you were to set times for different pieces, like getting through consent, and then the item 16D is at 9:45 and we actually get through the agenda at 8:45. I mean, we're not bound by the timeline, right? We wouldn't have to delay the meeting or anything like that, right?
Go ahead, Rich.
To what end? I mean, what's the point of setting the time limits if they're going to be arbitrary? We have no control over who shows up in the audience and what level of input they have and what kind of conversation that spurs amongst the council members. Yes, I'm very much about, focusing on the agenda, staying on the agenda. And I think that's more likely where we trip up as a council is that we get sidetracked and we start talking about things that are peripheral of the agenda rather than sticking to a timeline that's somebody's best guess. And I think it's going to be more work than.
You stole the words right out of my mouth now. That's precisely what I was thinking.
I'll just offer, I'm on a committee, the Yakima Basin Fish and Wildlife Commission does that. But we don't have the public comment issues and it is very fuzzy, but it gives the chair a sense of when to close off discussion but I think that a chair that is following things can, we know when the discussion's gone on too long and to wrap it up, but wish you had more.
no, not on this. I had a question.
Okay.
General.
Go ahead.
I was a little confused. There was the section where you talked about the points of order,
Right?
the importance of that. And then when you talked about staff relationships, you used the phrase points of order in the interaction, I believe, between staff and council. And that would seem to be inconsistent. I don't understand how staff could bring forward a point of order under the definition that you provided earlier in the presentation.
So it's a great question. Under Robert's rules, point of order is a motion that is made by a member of the body. But some councils have found it helpful to extend permission to make a point of order to key staff. For example, a newly elected mayor took the council into executive session to discuss the appointment of to fill a vacancy. And when she emerged, she said, "Clerk, please prepare the oath of office for so-and-so." Well, that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. A council must vote in open session to make an appointment. And so if the clerk had been able to say point of order, Madam Mayor, under the Open Meetings Act, the council needs to vote on this, it would have been helpful. And I do know actually of 3 cities that have done this, that have given the city manager, the attorney, or the clerk the power to make a point of order. You don't have to, it's just a suggestion.
That happens naturally. They just don't say.
Realistically, that's how it works.
So I'm not always hearing the council members.
Our staff does correct us when we go off track. They don't state point of order as such.
No, but they're willing to speak up.
They are willing to speak up
Well, that's the important thing.
and we do listen to them.
That's also important.
And I think generally my experience has been the council also looks to staff for that direction.
Yes. If we are unclear about stuff, we ask.
Great, great.
I personally, my observation is I think our biggest tendency is to launch into conversations too frequently rather than debates. So that's something I think we could all work on.
Very good. And of course, it's useful to have what we call a parking lot, where if you have a topic that seems relevant but isn't immediate, you can say, well, we'll put that in the parking lot and tackle it later.
Mhm.
Just to mention, as far as time limits, as my understanding, you're not obliged to hear from everyone who wishes to speak in public comment. It is allowed in Washington State to say, we'll take 10 minutes for public comment, or 15 minutes, or 30 minutes, or whatever works for you. And we, in fact, recommend setting up projected time limits, which can also be suspended. You can suspend a time limit of any kind by a 2/3 vote without debate. So if 7 people are voting, that's 5 people voting in favor. I learned about the not debate part from working with the city in Colorado that had started the meeting at 7 p.m. and it was 1 a.m. and they spent 15 minutes debating whether to extend it by another 30 minutes. And I thought, well, this certainly shows why Robert says you can't debate time limits or suspending the rules.
I had a question. I'm just curious on your experiences. I believe, and I can't recall if this is current, if it's changed, but I believe it was the city of Spokane that established its public comment period for something like 30 minutes prior to the beginning of each council meeting.
Uh-huh.
And the way it was described to me was they open it and then the council members actually get up and leave if they choose back. And that didn't sound very formal, but I wondered if you've run into anything like we kind of place our public comment on non-agenda items sort of in the front third, the middle, roughly before we get into the business. But I'd be interested in your experience on the best way to get that sort of comment on items that aren't necessarily on the agenda.
Well, we recommend having 2 public comment periods, one at the beginning and one at the end, or one partway through and one at the end. And we're really not in favor of taking public comment on individual items, because we've seen so many instances where this just makes the meetings go on forever. But we feel if you give the public the opportunity before, they can say what about their views on it. Communities that have established the habit, the custom of taking public comment on individual items will probably continue. They're not going to change because Jurassic Parliament says something different. But attending, staying in the room, paying attention, giving the body language that says that you're listening is critical. It's just a disaster. That was happening on the King County Council as well. They were going out to get coffee during public comment. I mean, what does that say to your citizens? That's just a very, very unfortunate. And since public comment is not a time for discussion and explanation and dialogue, your personal physical body language is even more important. It's not easy to listen carefully and attentively when you can't respond directly, but you need to do it. Thank you for bringing that up, David.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Could I get one clarification on the public comment?
Sure.
Point about not being required to allow for public comment on specific items. Would that exclude public hearings under Washington state law or public meetings?
Oh, yeah. Public hearings are very different.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, public hearing is a whole different animal.
That was my understanding.
Yes,
Okay.
indeed.
Much.
And as you probably all know, the legislature passed a new law, and you are now required to take public comment before or at each meeting at which final decisions are made. So MRSC has a couple of good posts on that. Some cities didn't used to take public comment at study sessions, but it's my interpretation that that's required. But again, it's up to you. It doesn't have to be on every item. Public's election to public office should not be sentenced to penal servitude, in my view.
I have a question. Can a member of the committee or the council or whatever the group is that's meeting call a point of order on a public comment?
No, not at all. The point of order refers to the action of the body itself. The basic situation is the public can say whatever it wants within very narrow limits. And so it's quite different from the restrictions on the council. So you just want to be aware of that. And we have lots of information on our website about that. The courts have found that basically people, there's this guy, Alex Zimmerman, who's always coming to Seattle City Council meetings and saying, you murderers, you Nazis. And they have to let him do it. Give him his 3 minutes. All right, so I'm going to move on ahead.
Because that's
Dan?
not consistent with how we conduct, with our statement.
Yeah.
What's that?
That is not consistent with how we have approached non-agenda public comment.
Well, I would say two things. One is the statement which is read at the beginning. It says something like, will not accept derogatory language or things like that. But then we've also been told by attorney that we have to pretty much let people speak their voice. So I don't know which is more compelling.
Oh, I know which was more compelling. It's the law. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you should change your statement. You can encourage people to be polite, but you cannot prohibit it. And it's not good, as we all know, as all of us, especially who have been parents, to have a law or a rule that you don't enforce. So we have a sample public comment statement, and I'd be glad to send that to you if you like. But as I say, that wasn't included in our topic today, but there are jillions of lots of stuff on our website about it. But the courts have been very clear about it, that personal attacks will not be tolerated, whatever. You can't say that. You absolutely cannot say that.
And our statement has changed.
Okay, but I would also say that we have enforced it. There have been times when I was in the chair.
But
where
more
we
recently, it
enforced
has changed.
Yeah, so Brett Vinson, an attorney, wrote a wonderful study called Danger Will Robinson, describing the legal cases involved, and that's available on our website. Okay, so let's look at how to do this. How are we going to achieve the goal that we want? So we have 5 suggestions for you. I'm sure which many of you and many of you in the audience are already doing, but you seek recognition before speaking. No one may speak a second time until everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. No interrupting in general, no sidebar conversations, and courtesy and respect are required. So the chair controls who speaks when. You raise your hand and you wait to speak until the chair calls your name, nods at you, or gives some other sign that you have permission to speak, that you have the floor. When you have not been recognized, you have a duty to remain silent, which is kind of a shock to some people. The exception is a point of order when it's essential. So here's another lovely paper written by a colleague, Rights and Responsibilities of the Member, that I will send to you. So the chair can keep track of who has spoken and who wishes to speak using a chart, or the chair can empower the vice chair to do this. It's good training for them. So here's a sample of a speaking chart, which I use when I run my choir board meetings. I just check everybody off as they speak, and then I know who has spoken and who is waiting, and you're free to modify this. Another great method is the round robin, where the chair goes around the table asking each person in turn for their opinion. People may pass and speak at the end. It's important to have a pencil in hand and jot down points or questions for when your turn arrives. And the chair must wait their turn also. So as I said, you don't want to let any 2 people hijack the meeting. There's another method we've developed called the exploratory round robin. And I commend this in particular to the Planning Commission and your other commissions and citizen advisory committees, because it's very, very helpful way to do discussion of complex issues. I'm not going to describe it today, but it involves having a discussion sheet like this in which you capture people's opinions. When a member has the floor, they have the right to speak until they've completed their comments. Members may not interrupt each other. The chair may interrupt members when it's necessary to bring them to order, and members may interrupt to make a point of order when it's essential. No sidebar conversations, no whispering. I'm sure you're not using the chat. No texting to each other or people outside during meetings, and no posting on social media during meetings. That can be very deleterious. A fundamental guideline is that courtesy and respect are required. So there are 5 kinds of remarks that are inappropriate at public meetings conducted according to Robert's Rules of Order. They are personal remarks about other members, except for conflict of interest, discourteous remarks, insulting language, attacks, inflammatory language, criticizing past actions of the group with 2 exceptions. If the subject is under discussion or the member is about to propose to amend or rescind the action at the end of their speech, then you can criticize it. And then remarks that are not germane, that are not relevant to the discussion. That's kind of the big umbrella. So we have another paper for you, inappropriate remarks on local government councils. And here's an example.
You're only saying that because you're a banker.
So that's a personal remark. And Robert says the measure, not the member, is the subject of debate. If any question arises whether a remark is appropriate or not, or a comment is germane, the chair rules subject to appeal. The chair may also turn immediately to the group to ask the members to decide. Ultimately, it's the group's call. As I mentioned, we're speaking here about discussion within council and commission meetings. These prohibitions do not apply to the public when they're giving public comment. We recommend that for remote meetings, you keep your camera on. Unless technical considerations prevent it, all council members should keep their camera on while participating online. Otherwise, you're lurking, you're observing your colleagues without yourself being observed. And this is disturbing and creates an unpleasant emotional imbalance. So the chair controls who speaks when. The chair serves as a benevolent dictator, enforcing the rules that the group has chosen, and individual members must seek recognition before speaking. If someone speaks up without being recognized, stop them. If someone speaks out of turn, interrupt them. If someone makes insulting remarks, cut them off. And I hope that all of you chairs out there will take this slide to heart. Here is a cheat sheet, language tips for meeting management, that I will include in your packet. And you can print this out and put it on your bathroom mirror. And in the morning, when you're doing your morning routine, you can practice these sentences. I know they seem archaic and fusty and out of date, but they're really very, very helpful in conveying the authority that you need. Members have a duty to obey the chair's directions. If they disagree, they can't argue back. What can they do? They can raise a point of order or an appeal. And they can take some satisfaction, and the chair can take satisfaction in knowing that when that is done, we are following in the most ancient traditions of our society, that it is the people who govern and not any particular prince, potentate, or individual. So now we're going to look at motions and amendments. So in our system, Jurassic Parliament, we use the main motion as the usual and customary way to start the action of discussion and decision making. For small boards, which as I've mentioned you are, it's okay to have discussion before a motion is moved, but Jurassic Parliament recommends moving the motion before discussing it whenever possible. So here is our main motion. And we recommend this sequence. The staff presents the proposal in writing and answers any questions. Each council member may ask 1 or 2 questions, then the next member has a turn. Public comment is taken if that's your process. The motion is moved and seconded. The members discuss motion and may amend it. That's when amendments come in. And then the members vote on the motion. So a main motion should be in writing if at all possible. And of course, if you have an agenda bill, it's already there. You can project it on the screen. You can use the 3-part form. A main motion should be clear and unambiguous. Don't say, I move what he just said, or so moved. It should be phrased in the grammatical positive. I worked with one city that had a motion not to adopt an ordinance. Don't do that. Make the motion to adopt the ordinance, and then if you don't like it, defeat it, vote it down. When you put not in a motion, it confuses people. A main motion must comply with the bylaws and the procedural law of the land, and you can only have one main motion at a time. If we have a motion here to raise the parking fees, and somebody else makes another motion to conduct a study of our neighboring cities, that motion is out of order, and it has to wait until we've disposed of the main motion. That's the fundamental guideline in Robert, one thing at a time. We really see his military background there. How do you introduce a main motion? 3 little words. I move that. That's all you have to say. I move that. And then you state the exact motion clearly. For instance, I move that residents be authorized to build catios in their private yards. Then Councilmember Smith seconds the motion. You second a motion to show that you would like to talk about it. It used to mean that you agreed with it, but that's not the case anymore. There's no need to be recognized. You just call out second, and it's okay to second a motion you disagree with if you want to explain why it's a bad idea. If there's no second, the chair says, there being no second, the motion will not be considered, and then moves immediately to the next item of business. Now, you can't speak against your own motion under Robert's rules. If the discussion has changed your mind, you should ask permission to withdraw the motion. You can vote against your own motion, but you can't speak against it. Now, if you're out driving and you come up to an intersection, you don't have to think, should I step on the gas or step on the brakes? You know what to do because you've internalized the system of traffic control. So I would like to invite you all, council members and commission and committee members, to memorize, to internalize these 8 steps to process a motion. Because if you have this down, it will be very, very helpful to you. And again, I'm sending you a paper on it in the packet. The member makes the motion. Another member seconds the motion. Then the chair states the motion. Once it's been stated, the members debate and/or amend the motion. That's when amendments come in. The chair restates the motion and calls for the vote. The members vote on the motion. The chair states the results of the vote, whether the motion passes or fails, and what happens next as a result of the vote. And then the chair states the next item of business. So notice that the members hear the motion 3 times. When the chair states it initially, when the member makes it initially, when the chair states it before discussion, and when the chair states it after discussion. Or of course, the clerk can also read it. But this often is not done, and it's really important so that everybody knows exactly what we're voting on. So we have our motion. Residents will be authorized to build catios in their private yards, and it's been made and seconded and stated by the chair. So now we're going to have discussion. And the general contractor says, I feel that catios will allow our dear feline friends to experience the outdoors without getting hurt or endangering other wildlife. Here's an example of a sweet little catio. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this motion. So the photographer says, I'm in favor. My cousin has built a catio and her little pet Fuzzy is completely at home in it, as you can see from this picture. So here's Fuzzy enjoying life in her safe, secure catio. Then the architect says, I think this is a terrible idea. Catios are intrusive and will ruin the look of our city. Here's an example I saw when I visited Dino Dome last week. We don't want this kind of ugly building in beautiful Dinopolis. So the architect is completely against it. So when it seems that discussion is finished, the chair asks, is there any further discussion or are you ready to vote? And then if no one speaks up, takes the vote. These are on a small board like yours. These are rhetorical questions to see if anyone would like to say something, unless you have imposed a limit on how many times people may speak. The chair repeats the motion. The chair says all those in favor say aye, all those opposed say no. The chair announces the results of the vote, whether the motion passes or fails, and what will happen next, and then the chair announces the next item of business. The ayes have it, the motion passes, and residents will be authorized to build catios in their private yards, or the noes have it, the motion fails, and we will not implement this proposal. So note that on a voice vote, the chair must call for the negative vote, even if it seems obvious that the motion is unanimous. No debate during voting. Nothing can interrupt the voting process. Members are not allowed to explain their vote during the vote or afterwards, and even a point of order must wait until the result of the vote is announced. A member may change their vote up until the time the chair announces the result. After that time, it takes unanimous consent of the body, everyone agreeing, for the member to change their vote. And once the chair has moved on to the next item of business, it's too late to change a vote. Now, under Robert's rules, to abstain is to do nothing. Abstentions are not counted and the chair does not call for abstentions. However, if you're a public body, likely you will call for abstentions, and that's fine. And now there's a little confusion in your rules that I wanted to mention. You might want to take a look at this. 9.5a says, silence of a council member during a voice vote shall be recorded as a vote with the prevailing side, except where such a council member abstains because of a stated conflict of interest or appearance of fairness. So prevailing side means the side that wins. If the ayes have it, it's the ayes. If the noes have it, it's the noes. Or if it's a tie, it's the noes, because a tie vote fails. Then later it says any council member who abstains from voting will not have their abstention counted or tallied with the votes of the council on the question or matter under consideration, which must pass by a majority of those council members who voted. So these two sections seem a little in conflict to me. You might want to consult with your attorney about smoothing them out. Now, if you have a conflict of interest, you should recuse yourself from the vote. Recusal is a special form of abstention. Talk with your attorney before the meeting. Don't spring it during the meeting itself. And it may be that recusal is not enough. MRSC has issued this post, resolving financial conflicts of interest is abstaining from voting enough. So you might find that of interest. Now, suppose we want to amend the motion. In our system, we use dimetrodon to stand for amendment. You amend a motion to improve it, unless you're the US Congress, but we're not going to go there. The amendment applies to the main motion. The amendment must be germane or relevant, and anyone may move to amend, even the person who made the motion. So the engineer says, I move that we amend the motion by adding the words, provided that the plan for each catio is approved by the Design Review Board. So if it's adopted, it will read, residents will be authorized to build catios in their private yards, provided that the plan for each catio is approved by the Design Review Board. So there are 4 different ways to amend. You can add or insert words. You can strike out words. You can strike out words and insert words in their place. And you can substitute, which we do not recommend doing. And the amendment is processed using the same 8 steps that we just saw for a main motion. So you see how handy it is to learn those 8 steps. Now the challenge is we vote on amendments before we vote on the main motion in order to make the main motion as good as possible, to perfect the motion. So the amendment blocks the main motion. We've got our main motion, and then we've got this amendment, which prevents any action here until we've resolved it. So if we like the amendment and we vote in favor, then it becomes a part of the main motion. And then we have an amended main motion. Or if we don't like the amendment and we vote against it, then we toss it and we go back to the main motion. People sometimes get confused and don't realize that after voting on the amendment, the process continues. Once the fate of the amendment has been decided, debate continues on the main motion and more amendments are possible. Once you've dealt with one amendment, you may have others, provided that they apply to a different aspect of the main motion. It takes special actions, reconsideration, to go back and change something that we've already amended. And after all amendments have been processed, the body still must vote on the amended main motion. Now, I'd like to take a look at pitfalls, and I want to extend my thanks to Rick Stevens from Portland, Oregon, who prepared the initial list, which gave me and Jurassic Parliament the idea for these pitfalls for planning commissions and citizen advisory committees. The first and biggest pitfall is confusion about your job. And I like this from the city of Bellevue. The work of the Planning Commission is to carry out the instructions of the council. To carry out the instructions of the council. A planning commission or a citizen advisory committee is a body that has been established in order to do a job assigned by someone else. And this can be a challenge. Sometimes commissions or committees take the bit between their teeth and want to go beyond their mandate. I was very impressed with your boards and commissions handbook. I think it's the best example I've seen of such a document. So congratulations. I know a lot of work went into that. So we're going to quickly look at 9 different pitfalls. Here's the first one. The Planning Commission is considering a request to lower the setback from 50 feet to 20 feet. And a commissioner asks, isn't there a better place in the city to site this hotel? The commissioner is asking the wrong question. It's not the commission's job to decide where somebody should buy property and build a hotel. The question was only the setback. You must answer the questions assigned to you by the council, not propose unrelated alternatives. Second, the Environmental Commission is considering recommending setting aside some wetlands. And a commissioner says, I think we can't address this until the university report comes out in 5 years. Well, I call that asking for the moon. It's an unfortunate fact of governance that sometimes bodies must make decisions with less than adequate information. 3, the staff have made a recommendation to purchase a historic farm site as a museum. And a commissioner says, why are the staff making this recommendation? I think we're wasting our money on staff salaries. Only citizens really understand the issues there. And of course, maybe that's not said quite so explicitly, but it can be an attitude that some folks have. That is confusion about staff role. We need staff. Staff are employees of the city, and the commission or committee may not direct them independently of their assigned tasks. Staff have a duty to remind citizen volunteers of the laws, fiscal regulations, constraints, and fiscal constraints that apply. This isn't sticking an oar in, it's doing their job. Also, commissions and committees must come to closure with their issue and define a specific action that they recommend, which they're sometimes reluctant to do. You know, you don't want to say, I move what he just said, or so moved. And staff can help bring things to closure. 4, the staff has carried out a survey, and a commissioner says, since I'm a professional surveyor, I can redo the survey to verify it. A commissioner may have valuable particular expertise, but they're recruited to the commission as a citizen, not as a technical expert. You have to let staff be staff and citizens be citizens. There's been a public outcry about changes to the irrigation district boundaries. The commissioner says, 6 of my neighbors are very upset about this. They've taken the trouble to come to our meetings, so we should do what they want. Rick Stevens calls this deafened by decibels. Being swayed by the emotional power of a presentation is a common problem. Decisions should be rational, not determined by decibels. Your responsibility, and this applies, of course, to council members as well, is to listen to your constituents while accepting your own responsibility to vote based on your own best judgment, not solely in response to crowd opinion. And we have a paper on this when public pressure is intense that I will include in your packet. There's mixed public opinion about a developer's plans to site a shopping center near the main road. And a commissioner says, when we're getting so many different conflicting views on this, I think we should just punt for another 6 months. So that's decision delay. And Stevens says, a planning commission is expected to render decisions in a timely manner. Some applications suffer death by 1,000 nicks, the continuation of projects like a soap opera. The Arts Commission is considering a report about the museum, and the commissioner says, I was on my honeymoon in Norway and I just haven't had time to study this. This is failure to read the packet. Commissioners must read their packets before the meeting. I know that sometimes they're hundreds of pages long, but nevertheless, you have to do it. The commission is discussing plans for a new hiking trail along the river, and the commissioner says, I think we have to analyze what kind of paving stones are best. so teeny tiny rocks don't get stuck in the paws of our dinosaur residents. Well, this is lost in the weeds or analysis paralysis. We all have a human tendency to delve into the details. And sometimes this leads citizen commissions astray as they spend too much time discussing details that are not relevant to their assignment. There doesn't seem to be an attractive option for the new community swimming pool, and both sites have environmental issues. The commissioner says the Planning Commission and the city can't resolve this issue. I move that we recommend that the city carry out a referendum. Well, that's shrinking from hard choices. When there are technical issues there, the referendum will not solve them. A commission does not have the right to decline to do its job. This is a waste of public resources. And then my favorite, the last one, this is real. There's a lot of dubious activity going on in the 110-acre park to the east of town. And a commissioner says, I move that all parks commissioners be issued t-shirts saying Parks Commission and be authorized to issue tickets to offenders. So this commissioner, a former police officer, obviously did not understand his scope. The parks commissioners are not police officers. So this is a list of these pitfalls, and I will include the examples in your packet. And I hope that it's helpful to you out in the audience, on the committees and commissions. So impressed that you have 15 of these in the city of Ellensburg. That's a wonderful depth of citizen involvement. And I thank you for your work. You know, I think that the work that you all do, you elected officials, citizen volunteers, and staff, is a marvel. It's really wonderful because you all are doing what you're doing, not because you paid someone a bribe or you are related to the governor, but because you care, because you're committed to your community. And I think that unfortunately, sometimes citizens don't recognize how much work and effort goes into the work that you do. But you're carrying on the traditions of our forebears and of our American society. There are many places in the world where you are unique, where what you do does not happen. So thank you. Thank you for that. So I invite you to keep in touch. We have a mailing list. We have a monthly e-newsletter, blog posts, and occasional messages about our live workshops and courses. And you can certainly opt out of the marketing emails if you're not interested. There's a check mark to do that. And you can email me at any time. I love parliamentary questions, so please feel free to be in touch. We have our book, Mastering Council Meetings. This was written explicitly for you. It was written for people in local government, and we've offered copies to the city if you like at a discounted rate. It's available also on Amazon, and you can get a free sample chapter by going to our website and downloading it. Also, I'm going to send you this, Citizen's Guide to Effective Conduct of Public Meetings Using Parliamentary Procedure and Robert's Rules of Order in Washington State. Now, this is not a Jurassic Parliament publication. This was prepared by a group of parliamentarians as a pro bono effort. It's just 10 pages long, but I think it's quite helpful in giving in very summary form the key things to know about this topic in Washington State. And it's also available for free download on our website. So I said that after taking this training, you'll be able to apply the principle that group authority is more significant than any one individual, even the chair. Use 4 fundamental guidelines for powerful discussion. Respond to disorder or difficult members. Make motions and amendments, and list 9 different pitfalls for planning commissions and citizen advisory committees. So here's another paper. The chair is not in charge of your meeting. It's a paradox, I know, because the chair is in charge of the process, but ultimately not the decisions. These are the 4 fundamental guidelines. The chair is the servant of the group, and the group is the final authority. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. To ensure this, no one may speak a second time till everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. Courtesy and respect are required, and one thing at a time. You know, in a way, if you follow these 4 guidelines, you are going to be good. You're going to be in accord with Robert's rules. And here's a paper about it. I'm also going to send you our sample discussion guidelines for local governments. feel free to go through this and rip out whatever might be useful to you and apply it for your own guidelines. These are the 5 kinds of inappropriate remarks. And then I have 3 papers I'm including in the packet. One is essential guidelines for city councils. One is essential guidelines for planning commissions. And one is essential guidelines for citizen advisory committees. So I hope you find them helpful. So I said we were here to invigorate you to participate in effective local government meetings. So did we do it? How do you feel? Do you feel invigorated?
We're invigorated.
Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Good. So we're a little bit early, I'm happy to say. So we have time for further questions or discussion.
Does council have any questions? And then I'm going to ask the committee members.
I have one quick one.
Quick, David?
Just quickly on the, I'd like some suggestions or brief advice on making motions in writing. We're not, the way our screen is set up, council members are not able to type a motion in real time and have it appear on the screen. And I wasn't quite, when you said it on the screen, if it was something that was prepared in advance, and if so, by whom? The chair? I guess my thought is as issues are presented, the agenda, should all council members be prepared to come to meetings with agendas pre-written based on the way they think the discussion will go in their vote?
Well, some cities recommend that council members submit, if they have proposed motions, that they submit them in advance. And the same for amendments to the clerk, not to the whole council. And some, and I've seen it's quite common to have a time constraint to be submitted by, 3 days before or whatever. If you are meeting in person in a less formal setting, like maybe a planning commission or so on, there are these 3-part motion forms where you write down the motion and the maker gets 1 copy, the chair gets 1 copy, and the clerk gets 1 copy. If you could say a motion orally and ask the clerk to write it down, and then the clerk should share it on the screen. I mean, there are different ways to do it. We're covering both in-person and remote meetings, so you have to figure out what works for you. But what we don't want to have is where the situation where the vote is taken and somebody says, "What did we just approve?" Which has happened. So that's why we recommend getting it in writing.
Okay, thank you.
Taylene, did you have a question earlier? Can you come up to the microphone, please?
Well, she's doing it. Do we have people online doing that?
Okay, Drew will tell me if anyone has their hand raised. Go ahead, Taylene.
So I just have a quick question on the call to order, or point of order. So so most of us here are on a commission of some kind. So if we have a question, if we have a discussion as a commission and we bring it to the council to put to the council, and sometime during that conversation, if we're in the audience while that conversation is taking place, can we as a commission member call for a point of order during that conversation?
No. A point of order applies to the body itself during its own deliberations. So ordinarily, a commissioner who would be attending council discussion on a matter would not have any speaking role. Now, if if you had concerns about it and you discussed it with the staff ahead of time and requested permission to speak to the council during their discussion, they might give that to you, but you'd only be speaking on behalf of the entire commission. You as an individual, your work is done once you've submitted the proposal, which drives people crazy sometimes.
I get that. My question is just around the conversation that then ensues by the council.
Yes.
If there was something in there, then that's because some you might not know if you have a concern.
Sure, but you wouldn't have any right to speak about that.
Okay. Thanks.
Now,
Yeah,
if you
point of order is only for when a rule is broken, not because you disagree or want to add comments.
Exactly. Now, if you felt, for instance, that the commission that the council was going the wrong direction and missing some important point, maybe you could give a note to the city manager. You know, maybe you could funnel that in that.
Hey, just for board and commission members here, typically if you have made a recommendation that comes in front of this council anyway, and you're in the audience when we're in discussion, there's an opportunity for you to speak to the council about those issues. I can't think of a time when a recommendation from a commission has come forward, and any member of that commission or the staff support have not been invited to provide comment or enhance the discussion. And so
We would always welcome clarification about
yeah,
the.
exactly. So because I think my experience has been, whether it's planning commission or DEI or whatever, we want the context in which the decision was made, which is the role that the commission plays. And so
Well, that's great. That's great. If that's your custom, then you're ahead of the game.
And that's different than the point of order, which is.
Exactly. Yeah.
You were interrupting. Right. That would
Yeah.
be.
That's good to know. I'm delighted to hear that.
Is there anyone else in the room who has a question, sir?
I'm the chairman of the advisory committee at the senior center. I got a question and I don't know how to put it, and I don't know if I'm going to be stepping on somebody's toes or what the system is. But I understand that there is outside people that cannot attend the meetings because of their handicaps or whatever. They can go and text their message to the commission. And they can say that as long as it's not an item on the agenda, they can speak of whatever they want to speak. They got 3 minutes to do this. Question I would like to ask. Now, I was kind of surprised because this is something new to me. I've been on city council where I used to come and all this, but all this is something new. I want to ask the question if these people that text the meeting and they go and speak on the subject they want, we give them 3 minutes. After the 3 minutes, what happens if this person has a topic that is insulting or anything else without us knowing what the subject they're going to talk about? As a chairman, what is my duty? Can I stop that, or what can I do?
I think the question is for Ms. McFarland, right?
Do you understand what I'm trying to
I
say?
Sure,
do.
sure, I'd be happy to address it. I'd be happy to address it. So you must take public comment. Somebody asks you, wants to tell you something. You can set requirements for the public comment. For instance, that it has to be relevant to your work, or that it has to be related to a motion that you're considering, or that it can only be 3 minutes. Bodies, government bodies, can set limits around public comment as long as those limits are what's called viewpoint neutral. Viewpoint neutral. And if somebody gets insulting or angry or upset, you listen to them and then you say, thank you, next speaker.
We have to take the insults.
Yeah, but you don't answer them back. Don't answer them back. Getting into dialogue during public comment is a big mistake. Now, if they're a serious person and they have something you'd like to take into consideration, you can direct them to a staff member and have them give the concern to the staff member and get their email so the staff member can reply. But don't get into discussion at the meeting of the senior center. And it's hard to do, you know, and you have to kind of say to people, I'm sorry, we can't dialogue in this meeting.
And usually when we take public comment, we say, we're not going to decide on this issue. We can't. It has to be on the agenda to make any decisions.
Right.
It has to be advertised.
And thank you for your service.
Add a clarifying question. So would those restrictions to comments on relevant business be up to each commission, or is that a standard that the council sets for all commission proceedings? So could each, I'll stop there.
So I think it's better for the council to establish general guidelines. I think it's too much for each one of your 15 commissions to grapple with this, and it takes a lot of time, and they may not be aware of the legal aspects of it. So it's something I think that you might want to think about including in your handbook and just say, you know, this is how we handle it. Bim, bim, bim.
Okay, thank you. Drew, is there anyone online who no hands are raised? So Councilmember Tab.
Just for thought, because we're starting to run up on time. The only observation I had in the information that was presented was the how we make our motions, when we make the motion. I would suggest, my experience here is we have often, something's on the agenda, a motion is made, seconded, and we have discussion. I would also suggest, though, that there are times where our council discussion has led to a motion that gets us to the point at which the motion is either supportable or not. And that at times, simply making that motion up at the front, which I believe was suggested, could lead to motions that will be voted. Anyway, I feel like the council discussion that we have had often leads to an understanding of the motion that will be supported or not by council. And I don't know where the rest of council is with that.
And also changing positions on how you might vote.
As you go, because it allows a framing of the motion that might be different than your initial motion. If we simply came in and said, here's what I moved. So I think there's a respect of process that we have here and conversation that often leads to an outcome that
You're suggesting that we don't have a policy that a motion has to be on the table before we have discussion.
Yes.
That we are a little more loose in our discussion prior to motions.
Yeah, I think we have I mean, there's certainly times where we have allowed the discussion. I have, when chair, allowed the discussion to roll for too long. I get that. But I also feel like there have been positive outcomes of supporting the discussion with council members prior to making the motion.
So in the interest of time, we have a meeting at 7 p.m. And we're going to need a break. We've already been at this an hour and a half. Thank you so much, Ms. McFarland. And we look forward to seeing the materials that you will send. And I'm feeling like I might have to take a weekend to just read everything.
Well, I hope it's helpful to you, and thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And thank all of our commission members who have attended. We really appreciate your involvement and service and willingness to engage and improve the game. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
No, we are recessing until 7 p.m.
Asking questions before that. So I don't feel like she said to me.